The document was older than most civilizations currently sitting in the Galactic Assembly. Ambassador Lyra held it carefully, her long fingers trembling slightly as she read words she had written herself 200 years ago. Species 7, 841 C. Common name: human. Planet of origin: Earth. Classification: terminal. Expected extinction timeline: 3 generations. She remembered signing it. She remembered feeling nothing but mild pity for yet another doomed species that would burn itself out before ever reaching the stars. Now a human trade ship was docking at the station above her head. Human music played in a market district. Human food had become popular among a dozen different species. Humans were everywhere. They should all be dead. Lyra closed the document and leaned back in her chair. The archive chamber was cold and quiet, filled with millions of similar certificates. The Galactic Assembly had been watching the universe for a very long time. They had seen countless species rise and fall. They had become very good at predicting which ones would survive and which ones would destroy themselves. They had never been wrong before. She thought back to the day when the Vayani observation ship first entered Earth's solar system. The year was 2031 by human counting. Her people had detected radio signals decades earlier and sent a team to assess the new species. What they found was a nightmare. The planet was covered in weapons capable of ending all life multiple times over. The air was filling with poison from their own machines. The ice at their poles was melting. Their forests were burning. And instead of working together to save themselves, the humans were fighting each other over imaginary lines drawn on maps. Lyra had watched the assessment footage with growing horror. Humans killing humans over resources they were actively destroying. Humans building bigger weapons while their children went hungry. Humans who knew their planet was dying and chose to argue about whether it was really happening. The mathematics were simple. The species had perhaps 80 years left, probably less. There was no point in making contact. No point in offering help to a species so determined to end itself. The Galactic Assembly had rules about such things. You did not waste resources on terminal species. You simply noted their existence, filed the paperwork, and waited for the inevitable. Miss O'Lyra signed a certificate and moved on to other matters. Earth became a footnote, a cautionary tale, another failed experiment in the vast history of the universe. And then the humans refused to DIET first. Nobody noticed. The Assembly had more important concerns than monitoring a doomed backwater planet. But 50 years later, a patrol ship passed through the solar system and found something unexpected. The humans were still there. More than that, they had spread. They had colonies on their moon, on the red planet next door, on the moons of their gas giants. The Assembly checked its records. Checked them again. Ran new calculations. The result was the same. Impossible. 70 years after that, a human ship appeared at the edge of Assembly space. It was crude and slow and held together with desperate engineering, but it was real. The humans had survived their planet. They had survived their wars. They had survived everything that should have killed them, and they wanted to talk. Lyra remembered the emergency sessions that followed. The confusion, the fear. Some species wanted to destroy the humans before they could spread further. Others wanted to study them like laboratory animals. In the end, the Assembly chose to do what it always did: observe, assess, and wait. That was 130 years ago. Now humans served on the Galactic Research Council. Human ships traveled freely through Assembly space. Human colonies dotted 100 different worlds. The species marked for extinction had become one of the fastest-growing civilizations in the galaxy. Lyra needed to understand how. She needed to know what she had missed, what everyone had missed. The mathematics did not lie, but somehow they had been wrong. And if they were wrong about humans, what else might they be wrong about? She pulled up her communication screen and composed a message to Dr. Priya Sharma, the human representative on the Research Council. Lyra had avoided speaking to humans for 2 centuries. She had not wanted to face the evidence of her failure. But now she had no choice. The message was simple. I signed your species' death certificate 200 years ago. I would very much like to know why you are still alive. She sent it and waited in the cold archive, surrounded by the records of 1,000 dead civilizations, wondering how one small species had managed to prove the entire galaxy wrong. Outside, she could hear human laughter echoing through the station corridors. The sound should not exist. Nothing about humanity should exist, but they did. Against all odds, against all predictions, against the weight of mathematical certainty. They did, and Lyra was beginning to suspect that the galaxy had fundamentally misunderstood something about the universe itself. Her screen lit up with a reply. Dr. Sharma would meet her tomorrow. The human had added a small note at the bottom. I think you will find the answer is simpler than you expect, and more complicated. Lyra read the message 3 times, then looked back at the extinction certificate in her hands. In her 2,000 years of life, she had never felt so completely lost. The humans should be dead. They were not. Everything she thought she knew was wrong. Numbers do not lie. Counselor Darren had built his entire life on this belief. For 300 years, he had served the Malari Institute of Predictive Sciences, calculating the fate of civilizations with perfect accuracy. His equations had predicted the fall of empires, the collapse of economies, and the extinction of 17 different species. He had never been wrong. Until the humans. Darren stood in his office, surrounded by screens covered in calculations. The same calculations he had been checking and rechecking for 200 years. Every number was correct. Every formula was sound. Every variable had been properly measured. And yet the answer was impossible. The Malari were known throughout the galaxy as the masters of prediction. Their mathematics could model anything. The movement of stars, the behavior of markets, the rise and fall of civilizations. When the Galactic Assembly needed to know if a species would survive or destroy itself, they asked the Malari. 2 centuries ago. They had asked about the humans. Darren remembered the day clearly. A Vayani observation team had returned from a small planet called Earth with detailed data about its dominant species. The Assembly wanted a prediction. Would the humans survive long enough to join galactic civilization? Darren had fed the data into his models. The results came back immediately. Extinction probability, 99.97%. Timeline, 3 generations. The humans scored catastrophically on every measure that predicted survival. They had nuclear weapons pointed at each other. They were destroying their own atmosphere. Their political systems were unstable and violent. They showed no signs of the cooperation needed to survive as a species. The mathematics were clear. The humans were doomed. Darren had filed his report and forgotten about them. There were always new species to assess, new civilizations to measure, new predictions to make. Earth was just another data point in the endless stream of galactic history. But now humans walked through the corridors of the Institute itself. They attended lectures. They published research. They existed. His equation said they should not. Darren had spent the last 2 centuries looking for his error. He had checked his formulas 1,000 times. He had consulted with the greatest mathematical minds in the galaxy. He had run simulations using every possible variation of his original data. The answer was always the same. The humans should be extinct. The probability was overwhelming. The mathematics were perfect, but the humans were alive. The door to his office opened, and a young Malari student entered. Her name was Sela, and she had been assigned to help Darren with his endless recalculations. "Counselor," she said, "I have been studying the human data again. I think I may have found something." Darren turned to face her. "Another error in the original measurements?" "No, the measurements were accurate." Sela hesitated. "But I think our approach was wrong." "Explain." "We calculated what the humans were doing," she said. "Their behavior at the time of observation, their resource consumption, their weapon development, their environmental damage. All of it pointed to extinction. Yes, that is the standard methodology. But we never calculated what they might do differently." Sela stepped closer, her eyes bright with the excitement of discovery. "We assumed their behavior was fixed. We assumed they would continue destroying themselves at the same rate. We never considered that they might change." Darren felt something shift in his mind, a crack in the foundation of everything he believed. "Species do not change," he said. "Not fundamentally. Not quickly enough to matter. The data is clear on this point. The data is clear for every species we have studied before, Seal agreed. But what if humans are different? What if they can change faster than any species we have ever encountered? Darren turned back to his screens. The numbers stared at him, perfect and precise and utterly useless. We calculated probability, he said slowly. But probability is not destiny. A 99.97% chance of extinction means there is still a 0.03% chance of survival. And the humans found that 0.03%, Sela said. They found it, and they grabbed it, and they refused to let go. For the first time in 200 years, Darren allowed himself to consider a terrifying possibility. His mathematics had not failed. His predictions had been accurate. The humans really had been 99.97% certain to destroy themselves. They had survived anyway. Not because the numbers were wrong. Not because of luck or divine intervention or hidden technology. They had survived because they chose to. Because somewhere in the depths of their extinction spiral, enough of them decided to change course. The mathematics could not account for that. No equation could predict the moment when a doomed species looks at its own destruction and simply refuses to accept it. I need to speak with them, Darren said. I need to understand how they did it. Sela nodded. I thought you might say that. Dr. Priya Sharma has agreed to meet with you. Darren looked at his screens one last time. 300 years of perfect predictions. 17 extinct species, all exactly on schedule. And one impossible exception that had broken everything he thought he knew. Numbers do not lie. But perhaps there were some truths that numbers could not capture. He shut down his calculations and walked toward the door. It was time to learn what the humans knew that the mathematics did not. The distress signal was weak, barely a whisper against the background noise of the Rust Belt. Most pilots would have ignored it. The Rust Belt was a graveyard of broken ships and failed dreams, a place where radiation storms could kill in seconds and debris clouds could shred a hull like paper. Rook turned her ship toward the signal anyway. She was 28 years old and had been flying salvage runs since she was 16. The work was dangerous and the pay was terrible, but it was honest and it was free. No bosses, no schedules, no one telling her what she could or could not do. Just her and her small ship and the endless void. The signal grew stronger as she approached. It was coming from a Vayani diplomatic shuttle, one of those elegant vessels that the ancient species used for important missions. What was doing in the Rust Belt was a mystery. The Vayani did not make mistakes like this. Rook checked her sensors. The shuttle had drifted into a radiation pocket, one of the dense clouds of stellar debris that made the Rust Belt so deadly. The radiation levels were catastrophic. Any Vayani inside would be dying already. She did not hesitate. She pushed her ship into the cloud. Her hull groaned as the radiation hit. Warning lights flashed across her console. Her skin began to tingle, then burn. She ignored it all and focused on the shuttle ahead. Most species could not survive more than a few minutes in this kind of radiation. Humans could last longer. Not much longer, but enough. Earth was a harsh world, and humans had evolved to endure things that would kill more delicate species. It was one of the few advantages her people had in a galaxy full of advanced civilizations. She reached the shuttle and locked onto its hull. The airlock connection was difficult in the storm, but she managed it. She pulled on her suit and stepped through into the Vayani vessel. There were 3 of them inside. 2 were already unconscious, their silver skin turning gray from radiation exposure. The 3rd was still awake, struggling to reach the communication panel. Rook recognized her. Ambassador Lira, one of the most important Vayani in the galaxy. Can you walk? Rook asked. Lyra looked at her with wide, confused eyes. You came into the radiation. You will die. Maybe, but not yet. Can you walk? Lyra tried to stand and collapsed. Rook caught her and carried her toward the airlock. She went back for the other 2, dragging them one at a time into her own ship. By the time she was finished, her nose was bleeding and her vision was starting to blur. She sealed the airlock and pushed her ship out of the radiation cloud as fast as it would go. Only when they were clear did she allow herself to collapse into her pilot's seat. Medical supplies are in the cabinet behind you, she told Lyra. Help your people. I need a minute. Lyra moved slowly, her own body damaged by the radiation. But she found the supplies and began treating her companions. When she was done, she turned to look at Rook. You should not have survived that exposure, the ambassador said. No species can endure such levels. Humans can, for a little while. Rook wiped the blood from her nose. Long enough. Why did you come? You did not know who we were. You risked your life for strangers. Rook thought about the question. It seemed strange to her. The answer was obvious. There was a distress signal. Someone needed help. I was close enough to try. But the risk, there's always risk. Rook turned to face the ambassador. My parents died in the Titan Station disaster. I was 12. A structural failure killed 3,000 people in about 10 minutes. My mother got me to an escape pod. She did not make it herself. Lyra was silent. After that, I had a choice, Rook continued. I could be angry. I could be scared. I could hide somewhere safe and never take another risk. She shrugged. Or I could keep going, keep flying, keep helping when I could. How do you endure such loss? Lyra asked. Your species has experienced so much tragedy. How do you continue? Rook smiled, though there was sadness in it. You just do. What is the alternative? Give up? Stop living? That does not bring anyone back. It does not make anything better. The only thing you can do is keep moving forward. Keep helping where you can. Keep hoping that tomorrow might be better. Lyra studied the young human for a long moment. This was not a diplomat or a scientist. This was an ordinary person, living an ordinary life in the harsh edges of civilized space. And she had nearly died to save strangers from a species that had signed her people's extinction certificate. I am beginning to understand, Lyra said quietly, why my predictions were wrong. Rook raised an eyebrow. What predictions? Never mind. Lyra leaned back in her seat. Tell me about your species. Tell me about humans. Not the official history. The real stories. Rook looked out at the stars and began to talk. She told stories about her parents and her childhood and the 1,000 small kindnesses that had kept her alive when everything fell apart. She talked until the medical supplies did their work and the Vayani crew finally stabilized. She did not know it yet, but she was helping to change how the entire galaxy understood humanity, point one story at a time. 3 years into empty space, and the crew had become something more than colleagues. Captain Yuki Tanaka watched them work together in the mess hall, sharing food and jokes and stories from home. 42 humans from 20 different nations, speaking a dozen different languages, united by curiosity and the simple need to know what lay beyond the next star. The ship was called the HSS Persistence. It was not the fastest vessel in the human fleet, nor the largest, nor the most advanced. But it had traveled farther from Earth than any human ship in history, and its crew had never once complained about the distance. Counselor Darren sat in the corner, observing. The Malari mathematician had joined the mission 6 months ago, seeking to understand what his equations could not explain. He had expected to find answers in data and measurements. Instead, he found himself watching humans simply being human. Captain, called Lieutenant Ade from the sensor station, we are detecting something unusual. A derelict vessel, very old. The design matches nothing in our records. Tanaka moved to the sensor display. The object on screen was massive, a ship built on a scale that dwarfed their own vessel. It was dark and silent, drifting through space like a ghost from another age. How old? She asked. Initial scans suggest over 1 million years. A hush fell over the bridge. 1 million years. Whatever species built that ship had been dead for longer than humanity had existed. Take us closer, Tanaka ordered. Carefully. They approached the derelict with caution. Up close, the damage was visible. Massive holes in the hull. Scorch marks from weapons that no longer existed. This ship had not simply failed. It had been attacked. I am detecting a power source, Ade reported. Very faint, coming from the central section. Tanaka considered for a moment. Protocol said they should report this finding and wait for instructions. The derelict could be dangerous. There could be contamination, or traps, or a dozen other hazards. Assemble a boarding team, she said. I want to know what happened here. Darren stepped forward. Captain, is this wise? We do not know what destroyed this vessel. The same threat could still exist. That is exactly why we need to look, Tanaka replied. If there is something out here that can do this, we need to know about it before it finds someone else. The boarding team found the power source in what appeared to be the ship's command center. It was a small device, still functioning after 1,000,000 years, containing a single message. The ship's translators struggled with the ancient language, but eventually the meaning became clear that it was a warning. Something was coming. Something that had destroyed this civilization and would destroy others. The message contained coordinates, data, everything the dying species had learned about the threat before the end. Their final act had been to leave this warning for whoever might find it. Tanaka gathered the crew in the mess hall. She explained what they had found. She showed them the data, and then she asked a simple question. Do we continue our mission, or do we investigate this threat? Darren watched in fascination. He had expected debate, argument, perhaps even fear. Instead, he saw 42 humans looking at each other with quiet determination. We investigate, said Lieutenant Ade. Obviously, others nodded in agreement. No one argued. No one suggested running away. No one calculated the odds of survival. The threat might not even exist anymore, Darren pointed out. It has been 1,000,000 years. We would be risking our lives for nothing. Or we would be risking our lives to warn others, Tanaka said. If there is even a small chance this threat is still out there, someone needs to find out. We are already here. We have the data. It should be us. But why? Darren pressed. This is not your responsibility. You did not create this threat. You owe nothing to whoever might be in danger. Tanaka smiled. Counselor, let me ask you something. If your ship was in danger, and a human vessel was close enough to help, would you want them to calculate whether it was their responsibility? Or would you want them to simply help? Darren had no answer. The vote was unanimous. The Persistence would change course and investigate the threat. They sent a message back to Earth explaining their decision, knowing it would be years before anyone received IT. As the ship turned toward the unknown, Darren found himself standing beside Tanaka on the bridge. I think I understand now, he said quietly. Why my predictions failed. Oh, I calculated what humans do. I never calculated why you do it. He paused. You do not help because it is logical. You do not help because it benefits you. You help because someone needs help. Because it is the right thing to do. My equations cannot measure that. Tanaka nodded. We call it being human. It is the one thing we have always been good at, even when we were terrible at everything else. The stars stretched before them, cold and indifferent. Somewhere out there was a threat that had destroyed civilizations. The Persistence flew toward it anyway, carrying 42 humans who had chosen hope over safety, because that was what humans did. 3,000 species filled the grand chamber of the Galactic Assembly. Some floated in liquid tanks. Others perched on specialized platforms. A few existed only as projected holograms, their physical forms too strange for the chamber to accommodate. Together, they represented the collected wisdom of a galaxy that had been watching civilizations rise and fall for millions of years. Today, they had gathered for a single purpose: to understand humanity. Dr. Priya Sharma walked to the central platform. She was 52 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and calm eyes that had seen both tragedy and triumph. Behind her sat Ambassador Lyra and Counselor Darren, the two beings who had spent centuries trying to explain why humans still existed. The Speaker of the Assembly, an ancient being whose species had no name that human mouths could pronounce, called the session to order. Dr. Sharma, the Speaker, said, "You have been asked to address the persistence paradox. Your species was classified as terminal 200 years ago. Every prediction, every model, every calculation indicated that humanity would destroy itself within 3 generations. You did not. The Assembly wishes to know why." Priya nodded and looked out at the vast chamber. 3,000 species watching her, waiting for answers. "I have reviewed the theories your scholars have proposed," she said. Genetic luck, hidden technology, divine intervention, secret assistance from an unknown benefactor. All very creative. All completely wrong. A murmur ran through the chamber. "The truth is simpler," Priya continued, "and harder. She touched a control on the platform, and an image appeared above her. An old photograph, faded and worn, showing a woman carrying a child through flooded streets. "This is my grandmother," Priya said. Her name was Ananya. In 2089, the city of Mumbai collapsed. Rising waters and failing infrastructure killed 2 million people in 3 days. My grandmother was trapped in the flooding with my mother, who was then a small child. The chamber was silent. She could not swim. The water was rising. She had no way to escape. And then strangers came. People she had never met, would never see again, risked their own lives to carry her and my mother to safety. They did not ask for payment. They did not check her identity. They simply helped because she needed help. Another image appeared. A group of humans in spacesuits, standing before a damaged vessel. In 2147, the first Mars colonists discovered that a rival mission had suffered a critical failure. They had limited oxygen, barely enough for their own survival. They shared it anyway. 3 of them died so that strangers could live. More images flashed across the display. Ships launching from a dying Earth. Children being taught in underground shelters. Farmers sharing seeds after a harvest failed. Scientists working together across borders that had once divided them. "Your predictions were based on what we were doing," Priya said. "You saw our wars, our pollution, our hatred, and you calculated our extinction. But you did not see what we did when everything fell apart. You did not see the kindness, the sacrifice, the stubborn refusal to give up." She paused, searching for the right words. "There's a concept in our language that does not translate well. We call it spite." The translators struggled with the word. Several species requested clarification. "Spite is when you do something specifically because someone tells you that you cannot," Priya explained. "When you succeed because failure is not acceptable. When you survive because dying would mean letting the universe win." She smiled, and there was something fierce in it. "The universe told us we would destroy ourselves. Your calculations confirmed it. Every piece of evidence said we were doomed." Her voice hardened. "We disagreed." The chamber remained silent. "We did not survive because we were strong," Priya said. "We survived because we refused to die. Because when our cities flooded, we carried each other to safety. Because when our resources failed, we learned to share. Because when our planet began to die, we reached for the stars instead of giving up." She looked directly at Lyra, who sat motionless in the observer's section. "You signed our extinction certificate. You were not wrong to do so. By every measure, we should have destroyed ourselves. But you made one mistake." "What mistake?" Lyra asked. "You assumed we would accept it." Priya shook her head. "Humans have never been good at accepting things, especially not our own end." The speaker leaned forward. "Dr. Sharma, are you saying that humanity survived through nothing more than stubbornness?" Priya laughed. It was a warm sound, full of genuine humor. "Stubbornness, hope, spite, love, the desperate need to protect our children and give them a better future than we had." She spread her hands. "These are not things your equations can measure, but they're the most powerful forces in the human soul." She stepped back from the platform. "You wanted to know why we survived. The answer is simple. We survived because we chose to, because we looked at our own extinction and said no. Because we are human, and that is what humans do." The chamber erupted in discussion. 3,000 species debating what they had just heard. But in the observers section, Lyra and Darren sat quietly, finally understanding what they had missed. Not data, not equations, not predictions, just the simple, impossible, unquantifiable human capacity to refuse the inevitable. The error was not in the mathematics. Counselor Darren understood that now. His numbers had been perfect. His formulas had been flawless. The calculations showed exactly what the humans were doing at the time of observation. The error was in believing that what a species was doing was the same as what a species could do. He stood in his office at the Malari Institute, looking at the same equations he had studied for 2 centuries. But now he saw them differently. They were not wrong. They were simply incomplete. Humans have been destroying themselves in 2031. That was true. But somewhere in the decades that followed, enough of them had decided to stop. Not all at once. Not perfectly, but enough. They had looked at their own extinction and chosen a different path. His equations could not predict that. No equation could, because the decision to change was not mathematical. It was human. Far across the galaxy, Ambassador Lyra descended once more into the archives of the Galactic Assembly. She found the extinction certificate she had signed 200 years ago. The document that declared humanity a terminal species. The document that had been so completely, impossibly wrong. She picked up a stylus and added a note to the bottom. Classification error. Species demonstrates unprecedented adaptive capacity. Previous assessment based on observed behavior did not account for potential behavioral change. Recommend continued observation. Recommend collaboration. She signed her name beneath the amendment and felt something she had not felt in millennia. Hoped that on the edge of civilized space, Rook received a message on her salvaged ship. It was from Captain Yuki Tanaka of the HSS Persistence. The ship was seeking new crew members for its next mission. The threat they had discovered in the derelict was real, and they needed pilots who could handle dangerous situations. The message ended with a simple question. Are you interested? Rook looked out at the star she had traveled alone for so many years. She thought about her parents, about the strangers who had saved her grandmother, about all the small kindnesses that had kept humanity alive when everything said they should be dead. She typed a reply. When do I start? The Persistence itself was already moving toward the threat they had uncovered. Captain Tanaka stood on the bridge, watching the stars ahead. They had sent word back to Earth about what they had found. More ships were coming. Human ships, but also Vayani and Malari and a dozen other species who had heard what humans could do. For the first time, humanity would not face danger alone. In the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Assembly, Dr. Priya Sharma watched as representatives from across the galaxy approached the human delegation. They came with questions, with offers of cooperation, with simple curiosity. The species that had been marked for extinction was now becoming a partner in something larger. You have changed things, the Speaker of the Assembly told her. Not just for humanity, for all of us. We have been predicting extinctions for millions of years. We have never considered that we might be wrong, that species might be capable of more than our models suggest. Priya smiled. Perhaps the models were never the problem. Perhaps you simply needed to believe that change was possible. The Speaker considered this for a long moment. An interesting thought, one we will need to study further. Take your time, Priya said. We are not going anywhere. She left the chamber and walked to a viewing deck where she could see the stars. Somewhere out there, the Persistence was flying toward unknown danger. Somewhere out there, her grandmother's courage still echoed through the generations. Somewhere out there, humans were doing what they had always done, surviving, adapting, refusing to give up. The universe had expected them to die. Every calculation, every prediction, every historical parallel had pointed to extinction. And humanity had looked at all of that evidence and simply disagreed. Not because they were stronger than the universe. Not because they had better technology or smarter leaders or more resources. But because when everything fell apart, enough humans chose to help each other instead of fighting. Enough humans chose hope instead of despair. Enough humans chose tomorrow instead of giving up on today. IT was not logical. It was not efficient. It could not be predicted or measured or put into an equation. That IT was simply human. Priya thought about her grandmother carrying her mother through the floods. She thought about the Mars colonists sharing their oxygen. She thought about every story of sacrifice and stubbornness and spite that had brought humanity to this moment point 200 years ago. They had been marked for extinction. Now they were part of something larger than they had ever imagined. The galaxy had expected them to die. They had other plans, and somewhere in the vastness of space, a ship called the Persistence flew toward the unknown, carrying humans who had learned the most important lesson their species had ever discovered, that the future was not something that happened to you. It was something you chose. The humans had chosen to survive, and now they were choosing to help others do the same. The stars stretched on forever, cold and indifferent. But the humans kept flying anyway, because that was what they did, because that was who they were, because the universe had told them they could not, and humans had never been good at listening.